music world.
Listening to Chris Cornell was like listening to a voice dipped in honey, dragged across train tracks as a locomotive careered over the top.
Last night, the world lost yet another rock legend. Chris Cornell, lead singer and songwriter for Soundgarden and Audioslave, had been touring in Detroit. When his wife tried to call his hotel room and got no answer, it was discovered he'd taken his own life, just hours after publishing this Facebook post.
From the moment I heard, I just laid down in my room and I put on Super Unknown, and it feels surreal that Chris Cornell's no longer here.
Soundgarden are credited for kickstarting the grunge explosion in Seattle in the 80s and 90s, inspiring bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains.
Chris Cornell has such a broad career. He did a whole album with Timbaland. He produced Jeff Buckley's record, Songs for My Sweetheart the Drunk. You know, he had Bob Dylan covering. That's one of the highest accolades you can get.
A story that I will always remember was my next door neighbor who was 18 and I was 12 showing me Down on the Upside. And I loved it so much that when he left his room, I couldn't go home without it. So the first CD I stole was Down on the Upside.
Not only did Cornell front two separate and massive bands, he also joined an exclusive club in 2006 when he voiced the theme song to James Bond's Casino Royale. Considered a musician's muso, 52-year-old Cornell's lyrics were often dark and now prove hauntingly insightful.
There's this element of finding that character that is the singer of the songs. The more challenging the material, the closer that person becomes to me, but also there's more of a sort of desperate nature to that person.
A father of three and a devoted Seattle Seahawks fan, Cornell had moved away from drugs and alcohol later in life, while maintaining regular stints on the road.
If I had any regrets about the 80s, 90s, was just that I drank a lot.
Today, family, friends and fans unite to remember and honour a troubled soul lost far too soon. Tom Larkin from SHIHAD briefly crossed paths with Chris Cornell when he toured with Soundgarden for the 1994 Big Day Out, and he joins us now. Tom, what are your reflections on Chris Cornell?
A game changer. I remember, in particular, the band that I'm in, SHIHAD, Soundgarden and their early albums played a pivotal role in us actually changing our style and becoming the band that we became.
Tom, were you surprised by the nature of Chris's death at all?
On one hand, it is shocking. When anyone who has been an icon for you or a leader goes away, death is hard to take any time. Insofar as some of the research I've done around working with artists, the idea that artists' life expectancy is in fact very short meant that his death has not actually come as a shock. The research shows, and there's been studies done across UK and the EU and in the United States, that the average age of death for a musician is around 57.
Oh. So does that mean that we're doing not enough to protect our musicians?
Music itself attracts people whose way of operating and their kind of creative gifts also have another side. It means that they're more sensitive and they're more likely to be overwhelmed, and particularly overwhelmed by aspects of life that others are more resilient and able to take in their stride can often knock someone who's sensitive and creative right over. Add to that the fact that the environment of the music industry is in fact a brutal one, and it's brutal in terms of the kind of psychological climate that it can have, the permissiveness around drug and alcohol use, and also economically. For instance, in Australia, 80% of all musicians in Australia exist under the minimum wage. You know, the general population has the statistic that 1 in 5 have a propensity towards mental illness or depression and anxiety, and actually with musicians it's 1 in 3. So we're talking about a very vulnerable group of people who are in a very, a high stress and anxious environment, and it's tough to survive long term.
One of the darkest ironies here, of course, Tom, is that Chris was quite critical of the way that popular culture seems to, I don't know, romanticise or even celebrate popular musicians who end up dying young. So how are we meant to react to this? You've got to remember a legend like this, but what's the appropriate response here?
One of the biggest myths around artistic creativity is that the idea that you've got to be miserable in order to tell great stories, or you've got to be crazy in order to make great art. The fact remains it's not actually true. What happens is that people who are miserable create very little art. It's only when they get some clarity or some perspective on that misery that they're able to kind of see something else and see the story that they lived through and then produce the art. But the bottom line is most creative people need clarity and health in order to produce great work. And that is the thing I would like to see change coming out of.
Tom, thanks so much for joining us with your insights tonight. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Well, there it is, peekaboo.